I want to focus on how democratic and human rights discourse has transformed today, especially in relation to Palestine and Israel. Because it seems to me that not so long ago, many of us on the left, in spite of being critical of liberal democracy and human rights, recognized that at least they provided a minimum of civil and political guarantees and democratic accountability. They were also hard won and hard fought because they were brought about by long struggles from the bottom by workers, women, civil rights, and indigenous movements, and so on. But things have changed quite dramatically today. Increasingly, we live in a world where the parliamentary and rights-based framework of late capitalism has become not merely an instrument for minimal rights and equality, but also an ideological cloak for justifying inequality, domination, and exploitation. And I think the case of the current Israeli state is a significant illustration. Increasingly captive to extreme right-wing groups, it's impossible to argue anymore that the Israeli state is democratic. It is not a democratic state in its overall practice of apartheid inside the Green Line. A blatant recent example is the Knesset's passing of the well-known 2018 nation-state law that declares Israel to be Jewish, which has distinct apartheid characteristics, I would argue. Basically, it anchors discrimination against Palestinian citizens and legitimizes exclusion, racism, and inequality. And this legislation, along with several other laws, are not just discrimination in practice, but by law. It means that a so-called Arab Israeli citizen and a Jewish Israeli citizen, while both citizens, enjoy different and unequal rights and privileges. So most land inside the Green Line is off limits to Palestinian citizens of Israel. And citizenship is guaranteed to all Jewish immigrants, but not to non-Jewish or Palestinian immigrants. And then there are the outrageous human rights violations happening outside the Green Line, the evisceration of Gaza taking place right now under the cover of eliminating Hamas, but also the long-standing settlement construction in the occupied territories, the demolition of Palestinian homes, the vigilante violence of right-wing hardline settlers terrorizing Palestinians in the West Bank with impunity, and so forth. All of this, I think, speaks to how democracy and human rights have become little more than an ideological camouflage for their very opposite: violence, exploitation, occupation, racism. Which is why that common accusation of anti-Semitism for singling out Israel does not stand up to scrutiny. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East is one common refrain in defense of the Israeli state. And if that does not work, then why not pick on China is the other refrain. But as my colleague and friend Zahi Zalua has argued, the problem with the China and Israel comparison is that everyone knows that China is not a democratic state. Yet Israel is depicted as a democratic state without actually being one. It has all the trappings allowing for its misrecognition as a democracy when it is, in fact, as I just outlined, some kind of liberal ethnocracy that has maintained a military dictatorship in the occupied territories for decades. Now, I do want to point out in conclusion that the current day Israel is one of the more flagrant examples of this ideological cloaking. Today's Hindu fundamentalist India is another significant case in point. But my view is that these examples reflect in perhaps more extreme form the global structural crisis of capitalist liberal democracy, with increasing, although not necessarily inevitable, increasing signs of a movement towards authoritarian capitalism, of which I would argue the rise of neopopulism in Trump's America or Pierre Poilievre's Canada are also symptoms. So one of the great challenges for the left in this regard, it seems to me, is better grasping how the conventional human rights and democratic form of struggle against capitalist liberalism is precisely what prevents the questioning and dismantling of the system.